December 16, 1944. The Ardennes lay blanketed under a thick, suffocating winter frost. Snow clung to the branches of dense pine trees, muffling every sound except the distant echo of artillery and the occasional crack of rifle fire. It was here, in this frozen wilderness, that the last desperate gambit of the German army would unfold, an audacious offensive designed to split the Allied front and reclaim a fading momentum. American soldiers, many inexperienced and underprepared for the bitter cold, huddled in foxholes, their breath misting in the frigid air. Helmets dusted with snow, rifles clutched tightly, they stared into the darkness, knowing the Germans were advancing under cover of night. The tension was palpable, every shadow seemed a threat, every snap of ice a warning. Tanks groaned through frozen mud, their engines belching smoke into the pine-scented night, while artillery shells screamed overhead, exploding in blinding flurries of white and fire. Supply lines were thin, rations scarce, and radio communication sporadic. The soldiers' hands, numb from the cold, trembled as they tried to steady their weapons. In this stark, frozen theater, courage and fear intertwined. Small groups of men made their stand, reinforcing positions with makeshift barricades, exchanging desperate signals, and bracing for the chaos to come. The Battle of the Bulge had begun, and for these American troops, the Ardennes was not just a forest, it was a crucible, a frozen hell where resolve, endurance, and sheer willpower would be tested against one of the most formidable winter offensives of World War II. The Ardennes, a region of dense forests, steep hills, and narrow roads, had long been considered an unlikely place for a major military offensive. Its rugged terrain and harsh winter conditions made movement difficult for large formations. For the Allies, the area was perceived as a quiet sector, lightly defended, a lull in the European theater as forces prepared for the final push into Germany. The American First and Second Armies, spread thinly along the front, had assumed the forest would serve as a natural barrier. This assumption would prove catastrophic. Germany, reeling from months of retreat on both eastern and western fronts, devised a plan to exploit this vulnerability. The operation, code-named WWII, aimed to surprise the Allies with a concentrated armored thrust, severing supply lines and recapturing the Belgian port of Antwerp. Hitler and his generals knew it was a gamble. Winter, fuel shortages, and weakened forces all posed immense risks. Yet desperation fueled ambition. If successful, the offensive could force the Allies to negotiate and buy time for Germany to stabilize its frontiers. American forces in the Ardennes were a mixture of seasoned veterans and recently deployed recruits. Many were part of the 28th, 106th, and 99th Infantry Divisions, units stretched across a front that was far too wide for effective defense. Equipment was scarce, winter clothing inadequate, and the dense forest provided cover for German infiltration. Commanders faced the difficult task of holding positions with limited intelligence and constrained resources. As December 16 dawned, the Germans launched their attack under the cover of darkness and heavy snowfall. Snow muffled the roar of engines, allowing tanks and infantry to advance with frightening speed. Fog and drifting snow reduced visibility to mere meters, creating confusion and fear among the defenders. Communication lines faltered as telephone wires were cut and radios failed in the freezing conditions. Reports from the front were delayed or lost entirely, leaving commanders to make rapid decisions with incomplete information. The Germans used innovative tactics to maximize the element of surprise. They deployed ski troops, disguised armored vehicles, and infiltrated small units behind American lines to disrupt communications and sow panic. Artillery barrages targeted key crossroads, villages, and defensive positions, isolating American units and creating chaos. The suddenness of the assault caused confusion at all levels of command, as officers scrambled to understand the scale of the offensive. American soldiers faced not only the enemy but the merciless winter. Temperatures plummeted well below freezing, with biting winds and heavy snowstorms making every movement arduous. Men suffered frostbite, equipment froze, and vehicles became immobilized in snowdrifts. Survival required ingenuity and resilience, from melting snow for water to improvising shelters in frozen forests. Despite these hardships, small pockets of determined resistance formed. Soldiers dug in along key roads and villages, prepared to slow the German advance at any cost. Villages like Bastogne, St. Vith, and Houffalize became epicenters of the battle, where small American forces held critical positions against overwhelming odds. Supply shortages were acute, food, ammunition, and medical aid were perilously low. Air support, limited by weather, could not always reach the front lines, forcing soldiers to rely on their wits, discipline, and courage. Leadership at both regimental and company levels was decisive, as officers coordinated counterattacks, organized defensive perimeters, and rallied men amidst constant bombardment. The Battle of the Bulge was not only a test of military strategy but a battle against nature itself. Frozen rivers, steep hills, and snow-covered forests turned the Ardennes into a natural obstacle course. Every advance, every retreat, and every firefight was complicated by ice, mud, and cold. Soldiers often had to carry heavy packs, weapons, and artillery shells through deep snow, their endurance strained to the limit. The harsh winter amplified the psychological pressure, making fear, fatigue, and the possibility of death ever-present companions. By the end of the second day, the scale of the German offensive was clear. American forces were forced into defensive positions, forming pockets of resistance that would define the course of the battle. Reinforcements were urgently called up from neighboring sectors, but movement through the snow-laden forest was slow. The Allies were stunned by the intensity and coordination of the attack, and yet, pockets of courage began to emerge. Soldiers refused to surrender, holding crossroads, villages, and defensive lines against overwhelming odds. The context of the Ardennes offensive underscores the dual challenge faced by American forces, fighting a highly organized enemy while enduring the harshest conditions of winter warfare. The Germans aimed for a rapid breakthrough, intending to paralyze the Allies and create a psychological shock. Meanwhile, American soldiers demonstrated resilience, adaptability, and sheer determination in the face of impossible odds. It was a battle that combined strategy, endurance, and human courage, set against one of the most unforgiving European winters in modern history. The Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest single battle fought by the United States during World War II, began with a sudden, ferocious German offensive that caught American forces off guard in the freezing Ardennes. The sheer scale of the operation, combined with the extreme winter conditions, created a brutal and chaotic environment, testing the endurance, courage, and ingenuity of soldiers on both sides. From the first hours of December 16, the Americans experienced the full shock of the German advance. German tanks, including the formidable Tiger and Panther models, rolled through snow-laden roads, while mechanized infantry and artillery units targeted strategic crossroads and supply lines. Skied troops and infantry infiltrated forests to cut off communication lines, and stormtroopers moved swiftly, disguised in American uniforms in some cases, creating confusion and panic among defending units. American commanders, initially stunned by the intensity and speed of the attack, rapidly mobilized what reinforcements were available. Units like the 101st Airborne Division were redeployed to critical points, including the strategically vital town of Bastogne. Surrounded by enemy forces, the paratroopers were determined to hold the town despite being outnumbered, short on supplies, and facing sub-zero temperatures. Their stand became emblematic of the battle itself, a testament to resolve, courage, and disciplined improvisation in the face of overwhelming adversity. The Ardennes presented a unique combination of tactical and environmental challenges. Snow-covered forests limited visibility, slowed movement, and rendered vehicles vulnerable to ambush. Artillery bombardment shook the frozen ground, sending men and equipment tumbling through ice and mud. Soldiers endured frostbite, exhaustion, and malnutrition, often making life-or-death decisions while their hands and feet were numb from the relentless cold. Every defensive position, every advance, and every retreat was influenced not only by enemy fire but by the merciless winter landscape. Small American units, often isolated and cut off from headquarters, faced critical moments that would define the battle's outcome. In villages like St. Vith and Elsenborn Ridge, soldiers held choke points, delaying the German advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Artillery teams improvised positions on frozen hillsides, providing essential support despite the impossibility of transporting heavy guns through deep snow. Infantrymen dug in foxholes and trenches, shivering through nights of relentless bombardment, while medics risked their lives to treat the wounded in frozen makeshift shelters. Air support, crucial for counterattacks and reconnaissance, was severely limited by overcast skies and heavy snowfall. Reconnaissance planes struggled to navigate the dense forests, and close air support could only engage sporadically, leaving ground units to fight largely on their own. The lack of reliable air reconnaissance made German advances unpredictable and heightened the reliance on local initiative. Company commanders, platoon leaders, and individual soldiers were forced to make critical tactical decisions, improvising strategies in real time as the situation evolved with terrifying speed. The Germans, despite initial success, faced logistical difficulties. Fuel shortages hampered tank movements, and the severity of the winter complicated supply chains. While their initial surprise had created deep penetrations into American lines, sustaining momentum became increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, American forces, benefiting from interior lines, began regrouping, reinforcing defensive positions, and coordinating counterattacks. Communication between units improved gradually, enabling a more cohesive resistance that began to slow the German advance. Acts of individual heroism punctuated the broader strategic picture. Soldiers held exposed positions under constant fire, delivering critical resistance at key crossroads. Artillery crews continued firing despite freezing temperatures, often while wounded or exhausted. Medical personnel, risking their lives repeatedly, salvaged the wounded from the snow and provided life-saving care with minimal supplies. These acts of courage, repeated across the Ardennes, collectively shaped the course of the battle and prevented the Germans from achieving their ultimate objective. As the week progressed, the initial shock of the German offensive began to wane. Reinforcements from neighboring sectors arrived, including elements of General Patton's Third Army, executing a rapid and daring maneuver through snowbound roads to relieve besieged units in Bastogne. This movement showcased the flexibility, coordination, and determination of American forces under extreme pressure. The combination of resilient defense, improvised logistics, and decisive counterattacks gradually shifted the momentum. By December 24, the tide had begun to turn. The German advance had been slowed and contained, their initial surprise blunted by the tenacity and endurance of American soldiers. Villages that had faced imminent collapse were reinforced, supply lines restored, and pockets of resistance consolidated. Yet the cost had been enormous: thousands of men killed, wounded, or missing, equipment lost, and entire towns reduced to rubble under relentless artillery bombardments. The Battle of the Bulge was a study in contrasts, chaos and discipline, terror and courage, winter's fury and human ingenuity. It revealed both the vulnerabilities and strengths of the American army, demonstrating how untested units could rise to extraordinary challenges, and how leadership, courage, and perseverance could turn the tide even in the most desperate situations. The Ardennes would forever be remembered as a crucible where the harshest winter, overwhelming enemy forces, and the sheer will of men combined to produce one of the defining moments of World War II. By the third day of the German offensive, the Ardennes had become a frozen hellscape. Snowstorms reduced visibility to mere meters, artillery fire shook the ground, and the bitter cold gnawed at the flesh of soldiers on both sides. German forces had carved deep into the American lines, creating a pronounced bulge in the front, a salient that threatened to cut off entire divisions and disrupt the Allied advance into Germany. The town of Bastogne became the epicenter of the battle's climax. Surrounded by superior enemy numbers, the 101st Airborne Division and elements of the 10th Armored Division prepared for a desperate defense. Roads were blocked by felled trees and debris, creating narrow choke points where small units could hold off advancing tanks and infantry. The Americans' objective was clear: hold Bastogne at all costs and prevent the Germans from capturing key supply routes that would allow further penetration into Belgium. Artillery barrages were relentless, hammering positions with deadly precision. The snow-covered forests amplified the sound, making every shell a terrifying roar in the freezing night. Infantry units engaged in brutal firefights, exchanging bursts of rifle and machine gun fire across icy clearings. Smoke from destroyed vehicles and burning buildings combined with the swirling snow, creating an almost surreal battlefield where visibility was minimal and danger came from every direction. Inside Bastogne, supply shortages reached critical levels. Food, ammunition, and medical supplies dwindled rapidly. Paratroopers melted snow for water, rationed every scrap of food, and improvised medical care for the wounded. Yet morale remained surprisingly high. The soldiers understood that their stand was pivotal. They reinforced positions in cellars, trenches, and makeshift barricades, often under direct fire, demonstrating discipline and courage that would become legendary. German forces pressed the attack with determination. Panzer divisions, supported by artillery and infantry, attempted to force their way through narrow roads and frozen forests. Tanks became bogged down in snow or destroyed by well-placed anti-tank weapons. Infantry infiltrated American lines under the cover of darkness, creating confusion and forcing small units to fight in isolation. Coordination within the German army was strained by the harsh winter, yet the pressure remained constant, threatening to overwhelm the defenders. A key turning point came when elements of General Patton's Third Army executed a rapid maneuver through snowbound roads to relieve the encircled defenders of Bastogne. Despite icy terrain and constant enemy harassment, armored columns pushed forward with speed and precision, breaking the siege and providing desperately needed reinforcements. This counterattack highlighted the flexibility and coordination of the American command, demonstrating that even in the worst conditions, decisive leadership and bold maneuvers could alter the course of battle. Meanwhile, small units across the Ardennes continued to resist fiercely. Soldiers held frozen crossroads, defended villages, and provided critical delaying actions that slowed the German advance. The combination of staunch defense, improvised logistics, and timely reinforcements began to shift the momentum. German attacks, initially overwhelming, started to lose their shock effect as American forces adapted to the terrain and conditions. By the end of December 23, the strategic situation had stabilized. While the Germans retained pockets of penetration, their advance had been contained. Bastogne remained in American hands, supply lines were partially restored, and the Allies were preparing to push back. The turning point of the Battle of the Bulge was defined not by a single heroic act but by the coordinated efforts of countless soldiers who endured extreme conditions, faced overwhelming odds, and refused to yield. The climax of the Ardennes offensive underscored the interplay of strategy, courage, and endurance. The Germans' initial success, built on surprise and momentum, was ultimately blunted by the resilience of American forces, effective leadership, and the harsh reality of winter warfare. The frozen forests, once a shield for the Allies, had become a battleground where every decision, every act of bravery, and every ounce of endurance mattered. December 24, 1944 to January 16, 1945. The immediate aftermath of the Battle of the Bulge revealed the staggering scale of destruction and the human cost of one of the largest engagements fought by the United States during World War II. While the German offensive had been halted, and the Allied lines restored, the Ardennes remained a frozen graveyard of shattered vehicles, destroyed towns, and exhausted soldiers. Snow and ice, which had shaped every movement during the battle, now covered the remains of battlefields littered with equipment, artillery shells, and fallen men. American forces began the grim task of accounting for casualties. Thousands had been killed, wounded, or captured during the brutal fighting. Medics worked tirelessly, often in freezing conditions, to treat frostbite, gunshot wounds, and artillery injuries. Entire regiments were decimated. Soldiers who had survived the initial assaults faced long marches, snowbound evacuations, and the challenge of reintegrating into reorganized units. Despite the victory, the psychological toll was immense. Men who had endured weeks of constant bombardment, freezing temperatures, and hunger carried scars that would last a lifetime. Towns across the Ardennes bore the unmistakable mark of war. Bastogne, Saint-Vith, and smaller villages had been transformed into ruins. Civilians who had survived the initial onslaught faced homelessness, scarcity of food and fuel, and the trauma of witnessing family members killed or displaced. Churches, schools, and businesses had been destroyed or heavily damaged, and the process of rebuilding would take months, if not years. The frozen forests that had once concealed German movements now held countless remnants of the battle, abandoned tanks, vehicles destroyed by artillery, and makeshift defensive positions frozen in place, a stark testament to the intensity of the fighting. Military historians would later analyze the logistical lessons of the Ardennes. The German offensive, while initially brilliant in execution, ultimately faltered due to fuel shortages, harsh winter conditions, and the inability to sustain momentum against determined American resistance. American forces, though initially caught off guard, demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Coordination among infantry, armored units, and artillery, coupled with rapid reinforcement from Third Army divisions, prevented a total collapse of the front. The battle highlighted the importance of supply lines, communication, and flexibility in modern warfare, lessons that would inform the remainder of the Allied campaign in Europe. The human stories emerging from the aftermath were equally compelling. Soldiers recalled nights huddled in snow-covered foxholes, improvising defenses and sharing meager rations. Acts of heroism abounded. Infantrymen held critical crossroads under relentless fire, medics braved freezing temperatures to save the wounded, and commanders made split-second decisions that saved lives and preserved key positions. These narratives reinforce the enduring truth that, even amidst overwhelming adversity, human courage and resilience could shape the outcome of seemingly impossible situations. The Allies' ability to regroup and counterattack after the initial German surge demonstrated the depth of preparation and the strength of morale. By January 1945, American forces had regained lost territory, forced German units into retreat, and restored the front line to a more defensible position. Yet the battle left indelible marks, both on the terrain and on the soldiers who fought there. The frozen forests of the Ardennes became a symbol of both suffering and endurance, a landscape where the extremes of winter compounded the horrors of war. In retrospect, the Battle of the Bulge stands as a defining moment in World War II. It tested the limits of human endurance, challenged the capabilities of military leadership, and demonstrated the unpredictable nature of winter warfare. The aftermath of the battle underscored the cost of war in both human lives and infrastructure, while also highlighting the resolve of soldiers who faced not only a formidable enemy but the relentless power of nature. The Ardennes had been transformed into a crucible of courage, leaving a legacy of sacrifice, endurance, and tactical ingenuity that would resonate in military history for decades to come. January 17, 1945. The Ardennes lay quiet at last, though the echoes of artillery and the cries of men still lingered in memory. The Battle of the Bulge had tested the limits of human endurance, resilience, and courage. For American soldiers, the frozen forest was no longer just a strategic landscape, it was a crucible where discipline, improvisation, and sheer will determined survival and success. the winter offensive revealed both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the United States Army. Initially unprepared for the ferocity and scale of the German assault, American units nonetheless demonstrated extraordinary adaptability. Small units held choke points, commanders made life-and-death decisions under impossible conditions, and soldiers endured relentless cold, hunger, and fear. The ability to maintain cohesion and morale under such circumstances would become one of the defining legacies of the battle. For the Germans, the offensive represented a final gamble, audacious in conception but doomed in execution. Harsh winter conditions, logistical challenges, and the fierce resilience of American forces ensured that their advance could not be sustained. The Ardennes demonstrated the interplay of strategy, terrain, weather, and human willpower, revealing the complex factors that shape outcomes in warfare. Beyond strategy and tactics, the Battle of the Bulge illuminated the human cost of war. Thousands of lives were lost, and countless others were irrevocably changed. The survivors carried the memory of bitter cold, relentless bombardment, and the camaraderie forged in adversity. Their stories of courage, endurance, and sacrifice would become central to the historical understanding of the battle and a testament to the spirit of those who fought. In the end, the frozen forests of the Ardennes became a symbol of both struggle and triumph. The American stand not only halted the last major German offensive on the Western Front but also demonstrated that even under the most extreme circumstances, discipline, courage, and resilience could overcome overwhelming adversity. The battle left an indelible mark on history, shaping the final months of World War II and providing lessons in leadership, endurance, and the human capacity to persevere against impossible odds.